The Texas sun was beating down mercilessly as I drove my pickup truck through the Meadowbrook subdivision, the air conditioning struggling against the 97-degree heat that had settled over San Antonio like a heavy blanket. I wasn't supposed to be in this neighborhood today, but my foreman had asked me to drop off some extra lumber to Mrs. Patterson, whose fence we'd be repairing next week. What I didn't expect was to see something that would turn my world upside down. My name is Frank Rodriguez, and at 62 years old, I thought I knew everything there was to know about my life. I've been married to my wife Maria for 35 years, and we've built what I consider a solid, honest relationship based on trust and communication. I work as a construction supervisor for Alamo Building Company, the same job I've held for 18 years, and Maria manages the women's clothing section at Macy's downtown. We're not wealthy, but we're comfortable, and more importantly, we're happy. Our son Carlos married Jessica 4 years ago, and they live in this same Meadowbrook subdivision with our 2 grandchildren, Miguel, who's 6, and Sophia, who just turned 3. Jessica is a registered nurse at Methodist Hospital, and she's become like a daughter to both Maria and me. In fact, sometimes I joke that Maria talks to Jessica more than she talks to Carlos, sharing everything from recipes to neighborhood gossip to medical concerns. That last part should have been a red flag, but I was too trusting to notice. As I turned onto Bluebonnet Drive, I immediately recognized Maria's 2018 Honda Accord parked in Jessica's driveway. That was strange for several reasons. First, it was 2:30 on a Tuesday afternoon, and Maria should have been at work. Her shift at Macy's didn't end until 6 p.m. Second, she hadn't mentioned anything about visiting Jessica today when we had breakfast that morning. And third, both Carlos and Jessica should have been at work themselves, leaving no reason for Maria to be here. I pulled my truck behind Maria's car and sat there for a moment, engine idling, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe Maria had gotten sick at work and come here instead of going home. Maybe there was some kind of family emergency, or maybe Jessica had called in sick and Maria had come to help with the kids. But as I looked around the quiet street, I didn't see Carlos's truck, and the children's bicycles weren't scattered across the front yard as they usually were when they were home. The house looked peaceful, almost eerily so. I turned off my truck and walked up the familiar stone pathway to the front door. Jessica had given us a spare key months ago for emergencies, and Maria and I had done the same for them. It was part of being close family. We looked out for each other, helped when needed, and maintained an open-door policy that had served us well over the years. I knocked first, calling out, "Jessica, Maria, it's Frank," but there was no answer. I could hear voices inside, though, the low murmur of conversation that suggested they were probably in the back of the house, maybe in the kitchen or family room where they wouldn't hear the front door. Using my key, I let myself in, calling out again as I stepped into the foyer. "Hello? Anyone home?" I saw Maria's car outside. Still no response, but the voices were clearer now. I could definitely hear both Maria and Jessica talking, their tones serious and subdued. I followed the sound toward the kitchen, my work boots quiet on the hardwood floors. What I heard next stopped me dead in my tracks. "The oncologist said the scan results weren't what we hoped for," Maria was saying, her voice heavy with a weariness I'd never heard before. "The tumors in my liver have grown, and there are new ones in my lungs." My heart literally skipped a beat. Oncologist, tumors, liver and lungs. Jessica's voice responded, professional but gentle. "Maria, you can't keep hiding this from Frank and Carlos forever. It's been 4 months since your diagnosis, and they have a right to know." 4 months. My wife had been dealing with cancer for 4 months, and I didn't know anything about it. I stood frozen in the hallway, my hand gripped around the truck keys so tightly they were cutting into my palm. My mind was reeling, trying to process what I was hearing. Maria had cancer, advanced cancer, from the sound of it, and she'd been hiding it from me, from our son, from everyone except Jessica. "I know they have a right to know," Maria replied, and I could hear tears in her voice now. "But Frank just got that promotion at work. He's so happy, so proud. And Carlos just bought that new house. They're all doing so well, and I don't want to ruin everything with my problems." "Your problems?" Jessica's voice carried a sharp edge of disbelief. Maria, this isn't a problem you created. This is cancer. This is life and death. Your husband loves you. He deserves to know what's happening so he can support you through this. I leaned against the wall, feeling like the floor was shifting beneath my feet. All those times over the past few months when Maria had seemed tired, when she'd gone to bed early, when she'd said she wasn't hungry at dinner, I'd attributed it to stress at work or getting older. All those afternoons when she'd said she was going shopping or visiting her sister Carmen. She'd been going to doctor appointments, getting chemotherapy, facing her mortality alone. The doctor said I might have 6 months, maybe less, Maria continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I want to use that time to make sure everything is in order. I've been working with the lawyer to update our will, making sure Frank will be financially secure. I've been writing letters to the grandchildren for when they're older. I've been trying to prepare everything so that when I'm gone, the transition will be as easy as possible for everyone. But what about treatment? Jessica asked. What about fighting this? You're only 59 years old, Maria. There are options, clinical trials, different chemotherapy combinations. I am fighting it, Maria said defensively. I've been doing chemotherapy every Tuesday for the past 3 months. That's where I go when I tell Frank I'm having lunch with Carmen or running errands. But the treatments aren't working the way we hoped, and the side effects are getting worse. Tuesday, chemotherapy. That explained why Maria had been so exhausted every Tuesday evening, why she'd been going to bed right after dinner on those nights. I'd thought she was just having bad days at work. I should have walked into that kitchen right then. I should have announced my presence, demanded answers, insisted on being included in these crucial conversations about my wife's health. But I was paralyzed by a combination of shock, hurt, and a desperate need to hear more, to understand the full scope of what had been hidden from me. Maria, Jessica said gently, I understand why you wanted to protect everyone, but keeping this secret is destroying you. Every time Frank asks why you're tired, every time you have to lie about where you've been, it's adding emotional stress to an already overwhelming situation. I know, Maria sobbed. God, I know. But I look at him in the morning, making his coffee and reading the newspaper, so content with our life together, and I can't bring myself to shatter that peace. He's worked so hard for so many years, Jessica. He deserves to enjoy these years without worrying about losing his wife. But he's going to lose you anyway, Jessica said, her voice breaking now too. And when he does, he's going to realize that you took away his chance to say goodbye properly, to be there for you, to fight this battle together. That's not protecting him. That's robbing him. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, my head in my hands. Jessica was right. Maria thought she was protecting me, but she was actually taking away my right to be her husband during the most important battle of our lives together. I'm scared, Jessica, Maria whispered. I'm scared of dying, but I'm even more scared of watching the people I love suffer because of my illness. When my mother was dying of cancer, it tore our whole family apart. Everyone was so focused on her disease that we forgot to live. I don't want that for Frank and Carlos. But that's their choice to make, Jessica insisted. You can't decide for them how they want to handle this. Maybe Frank would want to quit his job and spend every moment with you. Maybe Carlos would want to bring the kids over every day. Maybe they'd want to research treatment options or get second opinions. You're making decisions for everyone based on your own fears. There was a long silence, and I could hear Maria crying softly. Then Jessica spoke again, her voice gentle but firm. Maria, I love you like my own mother. You know that. But I can't keep lying to Carlos and Frank anymore. It's tearing me apart too. Every time Frank asks me how you're doing, every time Carlos mentions planning a family vacation next year, I feel sick keeping this secret. I need more time, Maria pleaded. Just a few more weeks to get everything organized. Then I'll tell them. You said that a month ago, Jessica replied. And a month before that. Maria, you're running out of time and so are they. I couldn't listen anymore. My legs felt weak as I stood up, but I forced myself to walk back toward the front door. I needed air. I needed space to think. I needed to figure out how to handle what I'd just learned, without making everything worse for everyone involved. I quietly let myself out of the house and sat in my truck, staring at Maria's car while trying to process the magnitude of what I'd discovered. My wife of 35 years was dying of cancer, and she'd been carrying this burden alone for 4 months. Worse, she'd dragged Jessica into her conspiracy of silence, forcing our daughter-in-law to lie to her own husband and to me. The promotion at work that Maria had mentioned, it was true. I had been proud of it. After 18 years with Alamo Building Company, they'd finally made me senior supervisor, which came with a significant raise and better benefits. I'd been talking about maybe taking Maria on a cruise next year or visiting her sister in Colorado. Now, I understood why she'd seemed less enthusiastic about these plans than I'd expected. I thought about all the conversations we'd had over the past 4 months, how many opportunities she'd had to tell me the truth. Just last week, we'd been watching a movie about a woman with cancer, and I'd commented on how brave she was. Maria had gone quiet, and I'd assumed she was just moved by the story. The worst part was understanding how alone she must have felt. Maria had always been the stronger one in our relationship emotionally, the one who held our family together during difficult times. When I'd been laid off 12 years ago, she'd worked extra hours at the store and never once complained about the financial stress. When my father died 5 years ago, she'd planned the entire funeral and handled all the arrangements because she knew I was too grief-stricken to think clearly. Now, when she needed support the most, she'd convinced herself that protecting me was more important than including me. I started the truck and drove home to our small house on the west side of town, my mind churning with questions. How was I supposed to confront Maria about this without revealing that I'd eavesdropped on a private conversation? How was I supposed to act normal when I now knew she was dying? How was I supposed to handle the fact that Jessica had been lying to me for months? Our house looked exactly the same as it had that morning, the same beige exterior, the same small front lawn that I mowed every Saturday, the same flower beds that Maria tended with such care. But everything felt different now, viewed through the lens of my new knowledge. I sat in the driveway for a long time, trying to imagine what it would be like to come home to this house without Maria. 35 years of marriage, and I'd never seriously considered what life would look like without her. We'd always been healthy, always assumed we'd grow old together gradually, maybe dealing with typical senior health issues like high blood pressure or arthritis. Cancer had never been part of our plan. When I finally went inside, the house felt hollow and strange. I walked through the rooms, noticing things I'd somehow missed before. The prescription bottles hidden behind the coffee maker in the kitchen. I'd never paid attention to what they were. The way Maria had rearranged our bedroom, moving a comfortable chair closer to the window for better reading light. Now I realized she'd probably been spending time there during chemotherapy recovery days. The stack of papers on her desk in the spare bedroom that she'd said were organizing old files. Now I suspected they were legal documents, medical forms, the administrative aftermath of a terminal diagnosis. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at our kitchen table, the same one where Maria and I had shared breakfast that very morning. She'd made scrambled eggs and toast, asked about my day, reminded me to pick up my prescription at the pharmacy. Normal, everyday conversation between a husband and wife, except she'd been carrying the knowledge that our time together was running out. At 6:15 p.m., I heard Maria's car in the driveway. I quickly composed myself, not wanting her to see that anything was wrong until I figured out how to handle this situation. She walked through the front door, looking tired but smiling, carrying a shopping bag from the drugstore. "Hi, honey," she said, setting the bag on the counter. "How was your day?" "Good," I replied, my voice sounding strangely normal. "I had to drop off some lumber in Meadowbrook. Saw Jessica's house. It looks like she's doing some landscaping in the front yard." Maria's expression flickered for just a moment, and I caught it. The brief look of panic, quickly covered by casual interest. "Oh, really? That's nice." She mentioned wanting to plant some roses. Another lie. There had been no landscaping, and I doubted Jessica had mentioned roses. But Maria delivered it smoothly, the way someone does when they've had practice concealing the truth. "How was work?" I asked. "Busy," she said, starting to unpack the pharmacy bag. Tuesday afternoons are always hectic. I watched her put away what looked like prescription medications. Bottles I didn't recognize. Nausea medication, I realize now. Anti-anxiety pills. Pain relievers. The pharmaceutical arsenal of someone fighting cancer. "Maria," I said carefully, "have you been feeling okay lately? You seem tired more often." She paused in her unpacking, and I could see her calculating her response. "Just the usual work stress," she said. "You know how it is. Back to school season, lots of customers, long days on my feet. Maybe you should see Dr. Martinez for a checkup," I suggested. "Make sure everything's okay." "I'm fine, Frank," she said, perhaps a bit too quickly. "Really, just need to get through the busy season." We ate dinner together that evening, talking about ordinary things, the weather, plans for the weekend, a phone call from Maria's sister Carmen. But every word felt weighted with the knowledge I now carried. When Maria mentioned that Carmen had invited us to visit in October, I found myself wondering if she'd still be alive in October. When she talked about wanting to replant the garden next spring, I wondered if she believed she'd see another spring. After dinner, Maria went to bed early, claiming she wanted to read. I stayed up, ostensibly watching television, but actually trying to figure out my next move. I could confront her directly about what I'd overheard, but that would mean admitting I'd eavesdropped on a private conversation. I could pretend I didn't know anything and try to create opportunities for her to tell me the truth, or I could talk to Jessica first, explain that I knew the secret and needed guidance on how to handle it. None of these options felt right. The next morning, Maria was in the shower when her phone rang. Without thinking, I glanced at the caller ID. Dr. Susan Chen, oncology. The oncologist, calling at 7:30 in the morning. This had to be about test results or treatment changes. Something urgent enough to warrant an early call. I let it go to voicemail, but the fact that it had happened in our kitchen, in our normal morning routine, made the reality of Maria's situation feel more immediate and frightening. When Maria came out of the bathroom, I told her she'd missed a call. "Who was it?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "I didn't catch the name," I lied. "They didn't leave a voicemail." She checked her phone, and I watched her face as she saw the missed call from her oncologist. For just a moment, her careful mask slipped, and I could see the fear and exhaustion she'd been hiding from me. "Probably a telemarketer," she said, but her voice was shaky. That evening, I made a decision. I couldn't keep pretending I didn't know, and I couldn't wait for Maria to find the courage to tell me. Our relationship had always been built on honesty and directness, even if this conversation was going to be the most difficult one we'd ever had. After dinner, I asked Maria to sit with me in the living room. She could tell from my tone that something serious was coming, and I could see her bracing herself. "Maria," I began, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole thing before you respond." She nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Yesterday, when I was dropping off lumber in Meadowbrook, I saw your car at Jessica's house. I went inside to see if everything was okay, and I heard you and Jessica talking about your cancer diagnosis." Maria's face went completely white. She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. "I know you've been getting chemotherapy every Tuesday for 3 months. I know the treatments aren't working as well as hoped. I know you've been trying to protect me and Carlos from the truth. And I know Jessica has been helping you carry this secret." Maria started crying immediately. Not the gentle tears I'd heard through the wall at Jessica's house, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from months of carrying an unbearable burden alone. I moved to sit beside her on the couch, pulling her into my arms the way I had thousands of times over 35 years of marriage. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my own voice breaking. "Why did you think you had to face this alone?" "Because I love you," she sobbed against my chest. "Because you've worked so hard for everything we have, and you deserve to be happy. Because I didn't want my dying to ruin your living." "Maria," I said, holding her tighter, "you are my living. You are my happiness. These past 4 months, when you've been carrying this alone, that wasn't protecting me. That was keeping me from being your husband when you needed me most. I was scared," she whispered. "I was scared of watching you suffer because of my illness. I was scared of becoming a burden. I was scared of changing our whole life into a countdown to my death. But that's not your decision to make," I said gently. echoing Jessica's words from the day before. That's our decision to make together. We took vows 35 years ago, in sickness and in health. You don't get to decide unilaterally that I don't get to honor those vows. We sat there holding each other while Maria cried out months of fear and loneliness and regret. When she finally quieted, I asked her to tell me everything: the diagnosis, the treatment plan, the prognosis, all the details she'd been managing alone. It started with fatigue and some abdominal pain, she began. I thought it was just stress from work, maybe early menopause symptoms. But when it didn't get better after a few weeks, I made an appointment with Dr. Martinez. I listened as she described the blood tests that showed elevated liver enzymes, the scans that revealed multiple tumors, the biopsy that confirmed pancreatic cancer that had metastasized to her liver and lungs. Stage 4, inoperable, with a median survival time of 6 to 12 months with treatment. Why Jessica? I asked. Why did you tell her and not me? Because she's a nurse, Maria explained. She understands the medical terminology, knows how to research treatment options, can help me navigate the healthcare system. I thought if I had professional support, I could handle everything myself and then present you with a complete plan. But she's also Carlos's wife, I pointed out. She's been forced to lie to her husband for months. I know, Maria said, fresh tears starting. I know I put her in an impossible position. She's been begging me to tell you and Carlos. She said exactly what you just said, that it wasn't fair to make these decisions for everyone. Over the next several hours, Maria told me about the chemotherapy sessions she'd been enduring alone, the side effects she'd been hiding, the medical appointments she'd been lying about. She showed me the legal documents she'd been preparing, the letters she'd been writing to Miguel and Sofia for their future birthdays and graduations. I wanted to make everything as easy as possible for you, she explained. I wanted to handle all the difficult stuff so that when I told you, you wouldn't have to worry about the practical details. Maria, I said, the practical details are how I show love. Planning and organizing and taking care of business, that's how I take care of the people I love. By trying to handle everything yourself, you took away my ability to love you the way I know how. The next day we called Carlos and asked him to come over with Jessica and the kids. Maria had decided to tell everyone the truth at once, rather than continuing the cycle of partial revelations and managed information. Carlos took the news about as well as I had, which is to say, not well at all. He was angry that his mother had been facing this alone, angry that his wife had been forced to keep secrets, and scared about losing the parent who had always been his emotional anchor. Jessica apologized repeatedly for her role in the deception, but both Carlos and I assured her that she'd been put in an impossible position. She'd been trying to respect Maria's wishes while also advocating for honesty, an ethically complex situation with no perfect solutions. What happens now? Carlos asked when the initial shock had worn off. Now we figure this out together, I said. We research treatment options. We get second opinions. We organize our lives around fighting this disease as a family. And if the treatments don't work, he asked quietly, then we make sure Mom knows she's loved, and we make the most of whatever time we have, I replied. Over the following weeks, our lives changed dramatically, but not in the way Maria had feared. Instead of becoming a countdown to death, our days became more intentional, more focused on what truly mattered. I took leave from work to accompany Maria to all her medical appointments. Carlos rearranged his schedule to spend more time with us. Jessica became our medical advocate and translator, helping us understand complex treatment protocols and research emerging therapies. We did get a second opinion, and then a third. The diagnosis was confirmed, but we found a clinical trial that offered some hope of extending Maria's life and improving her quality of life. The treatments were more aggressive than what she'd been receiving, but she was willing to try them now that she had a support system. Miguel and Sofia were told that Grandma was sick, but that the whole family was working together to help her get better. They responded with the resilience of children, accepting the new normal of more family dinners, more time together, and sometimes seeing Grandma tired or nauseous after her treatments. 3 months after that devastating day in Jessica's kitchen, Maria's latest scans showed that the new treatment protocol was working better than expected. The tumors had shrunk, her energy was improving, and her oncologist was cautiously optimistic about extending her prognosis. "I was so focused on protecting everyone from my dying," Maria told me one evening as we sat on our front porch, "that I almost missed out on our living." "We're not done living," I assured her. "We might be on a different timeline than we expected, but we're not done." That weekend, we took the grandchildren to the zoo, something we hadn't done in over a year. Miguel held Maria's hand when she got tired, and Sophia insisted on pushing the wheelchair when Maria needed to rest. Carlos and Jessica walked beside us, and for a few hours, we were just a normal family, enjoying a Saturday together. As I watched Maria laugh at the monkeys' antics and help Sophia feed the goats, I realized that the 4 months she'd spent trying to protect me from her illness had actually been 4 months stolen from both of us. But the months ahead, however many we had, would be spent together, facing whatever came as the team we'd always been. The secret that had nearly torn our family apart had ultimately brought us closer together. Sometimes the very thing we think will destroy love actually deepens it. When we choose honesty over protection, togetherness over isolation, and hope over fear. I still think about that moment in Jessica's hallway, overhearing the conversation that changed everything. Part of me wishes I'd never heard it, that Maria had found the courage to tell me herself in her own time and way. But another part of me is grateful that I learned the truth when I did, because it allowed me to be her husband during the fight of our lives, rather than just the survivor she left behind. Maria lived for another 18 months after her diagnosis, longer than any of her doctors had predicted. The clinical trial worked better than expected, and the support of family and friends gave her strength that surprised everyone, including herself. When she finally passed, it was peaceful, surrounded by everyone she loved. Carlos, Jessica, the grandchildren, and I were all there. She wasn't alone, and neither were we. At her funeral, Jessica gave a eulogy about the importance of allowing the people who love you to love you fully, even in difficult circumstances. She talked about how Maria's initial impulse to protect her family had come from love, but how her eventual decision to include us in her fight had come from an even deeper love, the love that trusts others to be strong enough to handle the truth. Now, 2 years later, I still miss Maria every day. But I'm grateful for those final 18 months we had together as a complete family, facing her illness with honesty, courage, and love. The secret she'd tried so hard to keep had nearly robbed us of that time. The truth she finally shared gave us the gift of saying goodbye properly. Sometimes I drive by Jessica and Carlos's house in Meadowbrook, and I remember that Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. I remember the shock of learning that my wife was dying, the hurt of realizing she'd been carrying that burden alone, and the eventual understanding that love sometimes looks like protecting people, and sometimes it looks like trusting them to handle difficult truths. In the end, Maria taught me that the people we love don't need to be protected from our problems. They need to be trusted with them. And sometimes, the most loving thing we can do is to let others love us back, even when we're not sure we deserve it.